Hello and welcome to day 131 of 365 days towards racial change. My name is Tomlins Nyback. We're doing part two of our two-part series on tensions between Supreme Court and Congress. Although it's not tensions as though kind of a standoff, it is the U.S. Supreme Court coming in to kind of a vacant space and taking over. You probably know some people like that. We're here talking about black issues. Let me just do our standard introduction first. I was talking about black issues in America. I had a little bit of my personal life. This is just a year project I'm putting together. And we're trying to understand how black people got to where they were. You know, no matter where a black person finds themselves in America, I hope they understand that they come to wherever they're at under a lot of control. There's been a lot of attention paid to a black person's progress through American culture, and that's whether you live inner city, ghetto, roach infested vermin, or whether you are a high paid entertainer, athlete, talk show host, game show host. The eye is on you, and there are specific legal devices that the country, which we can call a company. If you look at America as a business, that's going to alleviate a lot of the headache as well. A lot of legal issues in place. We're going to talk about some of them today that put black people where they are today, no matter how well they're doing. Two thoughts emerge as I continue this project, many others though, but two concerns is the black mind being perpetuated from generation to generation? Are we passing on slavery attitudes, levels of ignorance, not stupid, just unaware of processes, the law itself? You know, some of the things we may talk about today may be things you've never heard about in the U.S. Constitution. We're coming out of Dr. Anderson's works, and I'm just reminded, we talked about some of these things before, but I'm reminded again about some important points of how black people got to be where they are, especially economically in America. We want to try to extract any moral feelings, right? Like slavery was bad and people are treating black people poorly and human rights violations and stuff like that. But if we can move that argument more into an economic light, we can see, I think we can look at the dynamic more objectively. Now, the second thought, or the second part of the first thought, is the white mind of privilege, expectation of favor. Does that get passed on from generation to generation? You know, I've got a little hint and inkling that white people sit around a dinner table or discuss racial issues much more than black people do, and never discussed in my family. But I can just feel it when I'm out in the public that white people have been talking about me. You know, when my ears are burning, I know something's going on concerning me personally and possibly my group. Now, my second thought is the financial literacy question, issue. Any kind of literacy, actually, but financial literacy. Does the black person understand leverage, the business models, business entities, leverage, what else? Investing, Do blacks understand that they are a consumer class in America, consuming so many Chinese products, and Asians historically, systemically, as a group, exclude blacks. They love to sell us stuff, they love taking our money, but they don't reinvest back into the communities. Look at maybe any bodega in a distressed neighborhood owned by blacks or Hispanics, and wonder if that organization that is receiving money for all the candy and stuff that they're selling, are they reinvesting it back into community? Probably not. You can probably be safe with that. So financial literacy. Do you understand? Do black folks understand how money works? What is the Federal Reserve? Why is that important to know that institution? National banking. What countries are our friends? What countries are our enemies? Are challenges to us? And why is that so? We can just follow the money, and we'll find out, get some clues to that. Now, I'm inspired by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. I've never met him, but I've seen his videos here on YouTube. I got 3 of his books. I want you to get these works. First book, A Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. We are actually referencing, this is a part 2 of question 21 in there. And very, very important. It sheds a lot of light on why black people are where they are, what they're doing. So we're in part 2 today. I'm glad I broke it up into 2 parts because it's a very densely packed question, and he really elaborates extensively on them. Black labor, white wealth, search for power and economic justice, and Dr. Anderson's national plan to empower Black America, Powernomics. You can find Dr. Anderson at powernomics.com and the Heritage Institute in Washington, D.C. Behind me, you'll see the hashtag #US2 symbol. That is, you'll find black women supporting each other, discoursing. It's kind of a response to the hashtag #MeToo movement. Interesting that black women and white women, diverge at some point. I don't know exactly the issues, but there was a necessity to respond. So do your own research. But I throw that up. I'm supportive. Definitely, black women have some unique issues that I can't even begin to understand. Check out Blag Enough, BLAGGENUF, and that's kind of a black Facebook. And if you found me here on YouTube, World Wide Web, and such, you are technologically literate, and you can find your community, and you can even start your own little vlog, video log, as you wish. Every once in a while we'll have story time, and we're going to get right back to it again, because I finished the book, and there's some very dense section here from Harriet Beecher Stowe's work, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Very important work. You get a lot of stereotypes between black and white people. We get blackface. We take the lid off of slavery. We forget about any slavery as being so civilized and respectful as maybe the media, movies might portray. Like, with the media show the slave understandably has an attitude, but are we talking about the dirt floors, the starvation, the exposure, rape, the separation of families, beatings, torture, stripped of all rights, all decency? We get into some of that in Miss Stowe's work, and we've not even started to scratch the surface yet, but we're gonna definitely get into some nitty gritty later on. Okay, day 131, part 2 of question 21 out of a Black History reader. And the question is, does the U.S. Supreme Court have the constitutional power to overrule Congress in Black civil rights issues? Now, I'll tell you, well, since we're already into it, I'll tell you, no, they don't. The U.S. Supreme Court had essentially three tasks as it began, but these tasks, they morphed. The Black issue in America, slavery, North and South, wherever you were at, it was just something, an issue you didn't want to deal with. Um, you know, because Black people were here, broke, poor, illiterate, just at the mercy of the white power in society. So, whether if they're free, okay, what are you going to do with them? If they're slaves, well, they're being abused and taken advantage of. What a mess American slavery was, and I believe still continues to this day. We'll get to that. But just for some review, three original intents of the creation of the Supreme Court: one, to decide appeals from trials held in lower courts. We hear about that all the time. Get involved in the appointment of ambassadors. Don't hear much about that. The president kind of picks his people, and there's not too much pushback from that. And three, to rule in cases in which a federal official failed to carry out their duties. And we're seeing some hints of that with these Mueller reports and subpoenas and whatnot. We also talked about the Dred Scott decision. I think yesterday I said I was going to look something up, the 3/5 of a human being issue in the Constitution. It was in the original Constitution, Article 1, Section 2. It says if you were not a free white and not an Indian, a Native American, then the rest of whoever was out there was 3/5 of a human being. So it doesn't say blacks explicitly, but who's left? You know what I'm saying? The blacks are left. That's the 3/5 part. Also, we talked about the Dred Scott decision. Slave goes to a free state, comes back. He says, I went to a free state. I'm emancipated. I'm free. Went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled on that. Now, that wasn't the first time that the Supreme Court challenged power and exercised authority. We go all the way back to 1803, the Mayberry decision, the appointment of government officials like that. The Supreme Court settled that issue, and that was the beginning of the Supreme Court beginning to broaden its scope and exercise more powers in the United States. Up comes 54 years later, 1857 Dred Scott decision, and the specific outcome was that is the statement you see in your brief notes underneath this video here. And the Supreme Court declared that a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. That decision was never overturned. We can find 12th, 13th, 14th Amendment of the Constitution doing away and addressing issues with this 3/5 of a human being nonsense. But this Dred Scott decision is high in my thinking as clauses and conditions embedded in the foundation of the fabric of this nation that that says a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. And, it means like, if I go to the Supreme Court with a legitimate beef and issue, if they choose to rely on precedents, then I'm screwed. I have no even rights in that space. There's some of my argument, about what's going on in America is like, we don't overturn some of the simplest rhetoric that lies in the Constitution and any other foundational documents here in the United States. So back to in the 3/5, we find that the 14th Amendment kind of undoes a lot of that language. And the 3/5, I get up in arms about that one. My emotions get triggered, saying that I'm less than a human being. Part of the another side of the argument, when we look at it economically, as far as voting power, let's see if I can explain this as briefly as I can. If you think about a slave owner with hundreds of slaves, that person is that person can come, if those slaves are whole people, then that's a whole block of votes, according to the Constitution, that a person can bring to the legislative floor and vote on things with. So it's a lot of power. The North didn't like that because they didn't have this silent partners, out there that they could count as far as votes. So that was a big problem. If you were into math and you like bean counting and numbers, you think it's 3/5 of a human being. That means every 5 slaves counted as 3 human beings. You just got to do a little bit of math. If you hate fractions, don't worry about that part. That's for all those geeks out there. So mid-1800s, the Republican Party was very active, actually, in advocating for black folks through all this. Some of this upheaval around the Civil War and things like that. Mid-1860s is here where we get the phrase 40 acres, a mule, and $100. That was a plan forwarded by Republicans to keep emancipated slaves from being further enslaved. Now, there's a lot of underhanded things went on with that. In the South, you've got crop burning, poisoning of animals, poisoning of water, burning homes, lynching. So, there's a struggle. Like we can legislate anything. Hell, I could write a law, but you just can't change man's heart. It's a sad thing. So there was still a struggle there, but their intentions was to see the emancipated slaves participate along with the white majority, white power here in America, to keep them from becoming slaves again. We call this the Reconstruction period. And the 14th Amendment and some of those amendments came out around the same time. Now, it's interesting to know, now Dr. Anderson has his pet peeve, and I agree with him. What we're talking about historically and stuff like that, these are not intended for the use of immigrants and fabricated minorities. We're not going to go into a long discussion today about that, but it's about the black message of participating in America openly and all that, to be an exclusive message for black folks. All this stuff in the Constitution, these things that came about because black people were going through a hard time. The black people earned an exclusive space to be treated better, and it's a tough argument, and I get disagreements even from friends and subscribers, but it's a valid argument. And think about triage. I'm just going to keep putting this in different different ideas for you. Triage. I love the show MASH, right? And triage is, it's people coming in off the line. And now, if a guy's chest is ripped open and he's missing his bowels, he's going to be in the front of the line if he's still breathing for care. But if I come in and I broke my finger because I heard a whistle or a bomb 100 yards from me and I fell down, I think they're going to give me a little painkiller and have me wait. But the heavy trauma goes first. Black people have a historical, we've got hundreds of years, we've got centuries of abuse, neglect, marginalization, um, rape, lynching, come on, family separation. Other groups either have to come out or they've immigrated or whatever. And I agree with their arguments, but that they just don't understand that when they come flooding in and they think they're helping us and we're all helping each other with our message of marginalization and abuse in America, they don't realize they're diluting the message and moving black people away from what we deserve here, that what we've earned here in America, our ancestors anyway. Okay, so we go into that occasionally, extensively. That's just a quick overview about being exclusive. These amendments and some of this stuff, they were written for black people because black people were going through it. We were exposed. I know the gay community, you know, they came out in increments and had, they got their martyrs and things like that, and immigrants have their martyrs and all like that. But those are not, those issues are still not powerful enough to match what black people bear in America. Mid-1870s, the Supreme Court, kind of 10 years later, mid-1860s, now mid-1870s. Maybe some of the old guard has died off. I didn't do any intricate research into the changes, but the Supreme Court is now emboldened to undo a lot of the Reconstruction rhetoric and policies that were real great pieces of groundwork for a black person trying to make their way here in America. And this idea, now the Supreme Court historically, because of just what we've just talked about, the Supreme Court historically is a institution here in America that's going to protect white interests. From the Dred Scott decision, a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect, to mid-1870s, to protect white interest. This two things come into play here. Number one is our literacy. I got a burden for financial literacy among black folks, but here's now a burden for political literacy. How does politics works? How do we get things going? Do we vote? Do we not vote? Does it matter? And stuff like that. And I've got occasional videos that talk about block voting and things like that. Issues that I need to get better with. And the second thing is Jim Crow, semi-slavery. After all of this supposed emancipation, freedom, inclusion, all the things written in the books, whether done or undone, it still didn't, undo about 100 years proper of Jim Crowism. Black people getting incarceration rates extremely high, north and south. So it's just not down and south, south in the United States, but all over. When a black individuals tried in court, their penalties or fines are extreme, often leading to imprisonment. And the imprisonment was just white landholders needing labor on either their plantations, building roads, infrastructure, ditches, things like that. And not only that, the terrorism. We are so hard on terrorists, but what about the Southern terrorism? Uh, Lynching, at least one a day historically. So, what? That's a hell of a lottery to be a part of. My black skin marks me to be hanging from some tree sometime. If you're familiar with a strange fruit, they think that's Billie Holiday. They got 3 or 4 brothers hanging up on the tree. So, what a night! So that's one thing. And the thing is that, like, the Supreme Court is that, it's that flowering, mushrooming power in the land, and now when it speaks or moves, that's the end of the argument. There are no more arguments beyond the Supreme Court, unless you leave the country, I guess. Maybe that's one way to protest, leave the country. But once a ruling is made in the Supreme Court, it's going to stick around a while. I was wondering, before we go today, about Clarence Thomas, and we don't hear much from him. Historically, he's not a big mouthpiece on the Supreme Court, but I'd love to pick his brain. Things don't happen overnight. There's bureaucracy, arguments, and time and stuff like that. But like, Clarence, how about let's revive this Dred Scott decision case and see if that can make a difference. And it's tough because, when you got athletes and game show hosts, talk show hosts doing so well in America, the argument might be that I'm being so extreme. But, I've been kind of down here, blue collar class all my life. My thinking is changing, so I believe my destiny is going in another direction. But it's a lot of energy, a lot of work, but it's given me a different dimension. I don't have wealth, opulence, and space, and all kinds of ease in finance. I work pretty darn hard right now, still for my money. Hope I don't lose that. Hope I don't lose touch. Listen, I'm about out of time. I know with breeze through, it's a very dense argument. I only took out pieces, bullet points, and skimmed over maybe the depth of what Dr. Anderson is offering here. But get the book, Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. You can get it from Paranomics.com. But then we're coming out of question 21. Also, check out question 100. Because that was an important piece. We recently went over the death of the civil rights movement. Some of the same elements are in that question as well. Thank you for hanging out. I want to welcome a new subscriber. We're still on a very private, exclusive list. Actually, it's not a big list. I'm not going to say any more about it. But we got a new subscriber today, and we're wishing her all the best. Please stick around as long as you are interested, and I hope this is informative, helpful on any level to you and everyone else. I'm Tomlin's Nyback. That's day 131 out of the way. 365 days towards racial change. I'll see you tomorrow.